Zeitgeist 2025. Now, if you don't understand the connection, then I highly recommend you read The Messenger, as it's filled with the most incredible discoveries involving how, exactly 3.5 years before the original date set by NASA for the asteroid Apophis, which I argue is biblical wormwood, at the middle of what most evangelicals and some Catholics call the 7-year Great Tribulation period, to come crashing down on this planet, April 13, 2029. The high holy days of the Feast of Tabernacles will be unfolding on earth. Just a few days before that will be the Feast of Trumpets. And 120 days earlier, which is the biblical numerology for the end of mankind, is Pentecost. Now, all three of these festivals are strongly tied by eschatologists to the second coming of Jesus Christ. But before I get to how America's secret destiny is tied to the year 2025 and the prophecy of wormwood or Apophis, you may have seen recently where NASA is calling an all clear on the impact possibility of Apophis for the year 2029. But what they're not telling you is that a number of celebrated scientists disagree. For example, one mathematician is warning that NASA's trajectory calculation of Apophis is off by as much as 600,000 miles, which Harry Lear implies could send Apophis crashing into Earth 8 years from now on April 13, 2029. Lear even sent an open letter to the President of the United States and U.S. government scientists, begging them to cross-check these calculations from NASA immediately, even though he ends his dispatch with an ominous admonition that we're probably already out of time. More impressive than Lear, top 100 scientist Nathan Myhrvold, in a recent peer-reviewed paper titled An Empirical Examination of WISE, NEOWISE Asteroid Analysis and Results, refutes much of the data from NASA, and he actually charges them with deliberately misreporting threats by near-Earth objects and even of behaving, quote, extremely deceptively with deliberate scientific misconduct in a cover-up of very real and potentially imminent space threats. And then there is famous planetary scientist and astrophysicist Neil deGrasse Tyson, who admits that on April 13, 2029, quote, Apophis will come so close to Earth that it'll dip below our orbiting communication satellites. It will be the largest, closest thing we have ever observed to come by Earth. The orbit we now have for it is uncertain. Pay attention to that. Because, he says, these things are hard to measure and hard to get an exact distance for, and, quote, we cannot tell you exactly where that trajectory will be, end quote. Now that list goes on, and it connects to other important information that I examine in the groundbreaking new book, Zeitgeist 2025, concerning why I believe that mankind has indeed most likely entered the last decade of history as it has been known, what prophecy teachers call the church age, and how the several unusual things that you're going to learn in that book set that work apart from all other books on prophecy. Now, among the amazing things that you're going to discover within those pages is how the Essenes of Dead Sea Scrolls fame were one of the ancient prophecy communities that predicted over 2,000 years ago that mankind would indeed enter its final age or jubilee cycle 4 years from now in 2025, 3.5 years before Apophis smashes into our world. Assuming for the moment that I'm right, and that the asteroid Apophis is biblical wormwood, and therefore 2029 represents a period around the middle of the Great Tribulation period when the trumpet judgments began. Monday, October 13, 2025, that is April 13, 2029 minus 3.5 years. That would be the approximate start date for what dispensationalists call the 7 years of tribulation foreseen in the Bible in such places as Matthew 24, Revelation 7, Daniel 12, and so on. But besides prophecy, 2025 is intriguing in that it's also the year envisioned 10 years ago in a series of studies co-organized by the Atlantic Council and government organizations from Europe, the United States, Beijing, Tokyo, Dubai, other partnering nations that led the United States National Intelligence Council and the European Institute of Security Studies to produce a report that I encourage you to read titled Global Governance 2025 at a Critical Juncture. And in that document, the highest level intelligence agencies in the world determined that a global government could emerge around 2025 from what they called an unprecedented threat that would materialize, requiring all nations to lay down their differences and to come together in mutual defense of one another against an unprecedented menace. Among some of the things that they foresaw included knowledge of an incoming asteroid, a new pandemic, which I happen to believe Apophis is also bringing with it via an extremophile microorganism that has a virus inside of it. They also foresaw biotech-created new forms of humanity, representing an existential threat. Other prescient secular research that focused on the year 2025 from times past includes a 1997 work by Professors William Strauss and Neil Howe titled The Fourth Turning, which examines Western historical paradigms over the past 5 centuries, and they discovered cycles of life and generational archetypes that expose an astoundingly revealing pattern of incidents which ultimately lead to chaos and what they called a fourth turning, which they, by the way, envisioned culminating in a totalitarian world government that they saw arriving, yes, around the year 2025. Now, the risk of such sacrificed civil liberties, like they imagined, under government authoritarianism. This was, of course, also foreseen by the brilliant English novelist George Orwell, who had endured the heartache, delusion, fears, and cultural shocks of the pre- and post-World War II Britain, in which he portrayed the ultimate goals of such totalitarianism and total government surveillance through his novels called 1984 and another novel called Animal Farm. Orwell died in January of 1950, long before the actual emergence of the very society that he feared was coming, a world of mechanized eyes and software slogans, a realm of meme speak and thought police as prophesied in his dystopian 1984 and in the fictional setting of Oceania, which depicted the era that we have now entered, and the 4 ministries, as he called them, that he envisioned under the figurehead of Big Brother: love, peace, plenty, and truth. The ministry of peace actually perpetrated unending wars. The ministry of love oversaw suffering and torture against those that would not adhere to the party line. The ministry of plenty weaponized starvation through socialism. And then there was the ministry of truth, the propaganda arm of the government media that employed fake news, doublethink, and newspeak as the official dialectic of the state. Newspeak is the term that Orwell invented for controlled language, restricted grammar, and limited vocabulary, as what he called a linguistic design meant to limit the freedom of thought, personal identity, self-expression, free will, that ideologically threatened the regime of Big Brother and the party, who therefore criminalized such concepts as thought crimes, contradictions of the English Socialist Party orthodoxy. Now, as might be already going through your mind, today in America, the nonfiction version of the Ministry of Truth has materialized, and it is fully operational through the Orwellian tools of modern Marxists and social media manipulators, including so-called news organizations that blacklist Christian and conservative commentary by burying search results and exhibiting other bias in their artificial intelligence shadow banning algorithms, and so on. Orwell actually foresaw this very society where social media and 24-hour news cycles invigorate a cancel culture mob into tyrannizing anyone who holds what they consider to be the wrong opinions, or say the wrong words, or point out the dangers of progressive ideologies' new truths.
I want to start with North Carolina, where a conservative student was actually spray painted in the face.
We were accosted by a few members of the YDSA club here. They're merely expressing our free speech, and these people rolled up in a concerted, intentional attempt, pre-planned attempt to censor our speech.
Let's head now to one of the most egregious examples of conservatives being targeted and physically attacked for their beliefs. Back in February, a recruiter was harassed and punched in the face at UC Berkeley. Watch this.
This case has basically gone cold. He pleaded guilty. The DA is still sitting on it, no trial. If you do physical violence against conservatives, such as a professor who smacked someone with a bike lock not too long ago, you might get away with it.
That's what's happening right now. The most vivid recent example being the burning down of all things Donald Trump, his brand, anything or anybody that appeared to support him. Now, in Strauss and Howe's The Fourth Turning vision, a deal with the devil ultimately includes the arrival of an unexpected national leader who would emerge during the current fourth turning. Now, this guy would come from an older generation, and he would lead the globe into a new world order, which they envisioned developing by the year 2025. This senior citizen, this oldest American president, this commander, whom they called the Gray Champion, and who some of us might worry could either be, or more likely pave the way for, Antichrist, would come to power as a result of the nation losing faith in existing government and desperate for a political savior to arrive and calm nerves by offering to build back better a socialist governance with welfare for the masses. This leadership, they saw, would seize what could only be described as a cancel culture crusade, warm to promulgating Oceania-like suppression of unapproved dialogue in order to rein in any and all challenges to the new social construct. Is it real? Just ask the MyPillow guy, or Mandalorian star Gina Carano, or conservative actor and pro-life advocate Kevin Sorbo, or alt-tech microblogging and social networking service Parler. If you challenge today's official narratives as handed down by America's militant left, it's a very good way to get deplatformed, shadow banned, publicly scorned, or worse, under the new Oceania rules. At Skywatch TV, we're all too familiar with this shadow banning of our reports, getting kicked off of our newsletter email service for conservative Christian commentary, and of course, I myself, once more being mislabeled by Professor S. Jonathan O'Donnell, the fellow in the Clinton Institute for American Studies that a few years back referred to me as Horns Milieu as the leader of the transhumanist agenda. But he's now referred to me again in another peer-reviewed journal, Religion, as a, quote, Christian nationalist, end quote, which USA Today calls, quote, a threat embedded throughout our governing institutions, courts, military, legislature, agencies, and police, end quote, which I certainly am not, as anybody who has read my warnings against dominionism could attest. I am a patriotic American. I love this nation, and I vote. But first and foremost, I'm a born-again believer, committed to advancing the gospel of the kingdom of God over any other kind of nationalism. It would just really be so nice, wouldn't it, if people would just read the Federalist Papers, including the 10th one, in which Madison argues that faction is what motivates Americans, meaning that our strength lies in passions and opinions on different things, and it is, or should be, our ability to learn from one another and compromise or peacefully disagree that lies at the foundations of greater resolution and civility, the bedrock of what made America great. But it seems political commentator Dennis Prager may have been correct when at the time he was watching unfolding events at the close of 2020, including the subsequent actions by big tech to censor commentary from a sitting president, he said,
"This is the Reichstag fire relived. 1933, a month after the Nazis took over, the German parliament was burned down. It didn't matter to the Nazis who did it. What mattered was what they could use it for, and they used it for the Enabling Act that they quickly rammed through Parliament, and it enabled the Nazis to curtail civil liberties in the name of a national emergency caused by the burning of the Parliament, of the Reichstag."
This is the Reichstag fire relived. We're living in a gigantic lie that is reminiscent of the Reichstag fire. Now, if you don't know what Prager was talking about, the Reichstag fire was an arson attack on the Reichstag building, home of the German parliament in Berlin, on Monday, 27 February 1933, precisely 4 weeks after Adolf Hitler was sworn in as Chancellor of Germany. Hitler's government stated that Marinus von der Lubbe, a Dutch council communist, was the culprit, and it attributed the fire to communist agitators. A German court decided later that year that Lubbe had acted alone, as he had claimed. The day after the fire, though, the Reichstag fire decree was passed. The Nazi Party used the fire as a pretext to claim that communists were plotting against the German government, which made the fire pivotal in the establishment of Nazi Germany. So the Nazis capitalized on the fire, and they quickly moved with a vengeance to cement their authority and to grant the state unprecedented power, of course, in the name of public safety, That resulted in suspending most civil liberties in Germany, including habeas corpus, freedom of expression, freedom of the press, the right of free association and public assembly, and the secrecy of the post and telephone. These rights were not reinstated during Nazi reign. The decree was used by the Nazis to ban publications not considered friendly to the Nazi cause, with communist electoral participation also suppressed. The communists previously had polled at 17% of the vote. The Nazis now were able to increase their share of the vote in the March 5, 1933 Reichstag election from 33 to 44%, and that gave the Nazis and their allies, the German Nationalist People's Party, who won 8% of the vote, a majority of 52% in the Reichstag. Now, Strauss and Howe were convinced 25 years ago that something very similar was going to unfold in the years immediately before Zeitgeist 2025, when they wrote their thesis. They saw the United States in the third turning then, and that the next crisis period, or fourth turning, would erupt around 2025, which I contend, again, is more likely than not to represent the start of what dispensationalist Christians call the Great Tribulation period. Will the suppression of free speech under the new administration's tech oligarchy and the Soros and Obama-backed agitators that have continued to threaten havoc across America, will that ignite the circumstances that assist the great champion's authoritarian rule? America has experienced three such major crises before: the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, and the Great Depression and World War II, each of which were followed by their respective periods of Reconstruction. These were times marked by social decay and civil dread that required Americans to carry a tremendous burden after massive conflict and substantial loss in order to try and rebuild a better future. And don't forget, it was Barack Obama who, after designating America no longer a Christian nation, declared just days before his election in 2008, quote, "We are 5 days away from fundamentally transforming the United States of America," end quote. His wife, Michelle Obama, echoed those sentiments earlier, saying, "We're going to have to change our traditions, our history. We're going to have to move into a different place as a nation," end quote. This intentional redefining of the nation and attempt at changing the course of the United States was partly what Donald Trump was trying to stop, and why in his State of the Union address in February 2019, he declared that as long as he was president, America would never be a socialist country.
Here in the United States, we are alarmed by the new calls to adopt socialism in our country. America was founded on liberty and independence, and not government coercion, domination, and control. We are born free, and we will stay free. Tonight, we renew our resolve that America will never be a socialist country.
Did all that change January 20, 2021, with the inauguration of Joe Biden? As the oldest American president ever, is he Strauss and Howe's great champion that's going to lead the world into a socialist, Marxist, totalitarian world government? According to the Christian End Times blog Signposts of the Time, quote, "We as Christians, and in particular those that understand and follow Bible prophecy, will be watching with much interest over the next days, weeks, and months ahead to see how God will use President Joe Biden to put in place the final pieces of the last days puzzle that will usher in the tribulation period and the system of Antichrist," end quote. Are they right? Are we nearing the trigger events or chaos stage of a final fourth turning? Besides professors of history, like those who wrote the fourth turning and who foresaw what the actions and reactions of policymakers and social engineers would generate, behind such political players and master manipulators at these cultural realms, there's a different thing that I want to talk about, and that's an invisible order, vividly described in Scripture, that I believe holds deeper insight in where we are today and the influences that are guiding us to where we're going next. And that's what I really want to discuss in this presentation. Before and after the presidency of Donald Trump, the United States was, and now is again, on an intentional trajectory to fulfill what famous Freemason Manly P. Hall described as the secret destiny of America, which includes future national and global subservience to a God, the God of Freemasonry, a deity that most Americans would never imagine when reciting the Pledge of Allegiance to, quote, one nation under God. In fact, the idea by some that the United States was established as a monotheistic Christian nation by those who designed Washington, D.C., and that the God referred to on American currency is a Judeo-Christian one is a puzzling conclusion when reflected against the secret society, mystery religion, and deistic beliefs of so many of the founding fathers, as is, of course, perpetually viewed in the supreme architect deism of Freemasons and in the supreme judge of the world and divine providence notations in the Declaration of Independence and the countless pagan icons that dominate the symbols, statues, buildings, and seals that are carefully drafted under official government auspices. In fact, the Great Seal of the United States, which Manly Hall rightly called the signature of that exalted body of Masons who designed America for a particular and peculiar purpose, he said, bears rich symbolism, forecasting anything but Christianity. In fact, when Christians in the 1800s argued that a hypothetical annihilation of the United States would ultimately lead to antiquaries of succeeding centuries, that is, historians, concluding that America had been a heathen nation based on symbolism of the Great Seal, Congress was pushed to create something reflecting the Christian faith of so many of its citizens. U.S. President and Freemason Theodore Roosevelt strongly opposed that idea, but other Masons were not as frustrated with the plan because, given the ambivalence of the term God and the axiom that interpreted within the context of the Great Seal symbolism and the layout of Washington, D.C., this would certainly not infer a biblical Christian God. The slogan, "In God We Trust," therefore, whoever you believe that to be, was accommodated by Masons and other Illuminati, and so approved as the official U.S. motto. Now, in several of my books, including Zenith 2016, which, by the way, noted years in advance the date of Trump's presidential election as having been foreseen by prophets and sages for thousands of years as the apex date when governments would begin shifting toward the spirit predicted on the Great Seal of the United States, the Antichrist, followed by the man of sin's actual arrival and acceptance on the global stage. Will that be 2025? To illustrate the point that one definitely would not determine the God in America's official motto refers to the Father of Jesus Christ or a biblical Trinity, in Zenith 2016, I wrote this. Quote, imagine yourself as a space traveler who visits Earth in a fictional post-apocalyptic world, digging through the rubble of the once thriving planet. You come across a copy of a U.S. $1 bill with the two-sided Great Seal of the United States, joined in the middle by the phrase, "In God We Trust." Upon consideration, you ask yourself, what God did this refer to? And with no preconceptions, you allow the symbolism on the seal to speak for itself, from which you quickly determine that this had been a great culture who worshipped Egyptian and Greek deities, especially a particular solar one whose all-seeing eye glared from atop an unfinished Egyptian pyramid. Upon further investigation into the specific beliefs of this strange group, whose members had influenced the Great Seal, you discover from their highest masters, including one illustrious Albert Pike, that the sun god they venerated so highly had been known to them at various times in history by the names Apollo, Osiris, and Nimrod. I made this argument in Zenith 2016 because, unknown to most Americans and certainly average Christians, the Great Seal's mottos and symbolism relate to both Osiris and Apollo specifically, yet as one. Osiris is the dominant theme of the Egyptian symbols, his resurrection and return, while the mottos of the seal point directly to Apollo, and the eagle, a pagan emblem of Jupiter, to Apollo's father. For instance, the motto Anoet Coeptus, this is taken from Virgil's Aeneid, in which Ascanius, the son of Aeneas, from conquered Troy, prays to Apollo's father, Jupiter. Charles Thompson, designer of the Great Seal's final version, condensed line 625 of Book 9 of Virgil's Aeneid, which reads, quote, Jupiter omnipotus, audacibus Anoet Coeptus, or all-powerful Jupiter, favors the daring undertaking. He condensed that down to Anoet Coeptus. Jupiter, or he, approves our undertaking. While the phrase Novus Ordo Seclorum, a new order of the ages, was adapted in 1782 from inspiration that Thompson found in a prophetic line in Virgil's Eclogue 4, Magnus ab integro seclorum nascitur ordo, the interpretation of that Latin being, and the majestic roll of circling centuries begins anew. This is a phrase that is from the Cumae Sibyl, a pagan prophetess of Apollo, actually the most famous of them all, identified in the Bible as a demonic deceiver, and it involves the future birth of a divine son, spawned of a new breed of men sent down from heaven when he receives the life of gods and sees heroes with gods commingling. According to the prophecy, this is Apollo, son of Jupiter, who returns to earth through mystical life given to him from the gods when the deity, Jupiter or Saturn, returns to reign over the earth in a new golden pagan age. By the way, the alignment of Jupiter and Saturn on December 21, 2020, recently forecasted, which many, including pastors, were erroneously referring to as the Christmas star, which according to the Greek text, the Magi followed, an asteroid whose trajectory led them to Bethlehem, not a stationary star alignment like the Jupiter recent alignment. Anyway, this was the closest the two planets have appeared together in approximately 800 years, and it did indeed forecast the arrival of a messianic son, the false one, whose spirit will reside in the beast of Revelation 17:8. From the beginning of the prophecy, referenced on the Great Seal of the United States, we read, quote, Now the last age by Cumae Sibyl's sung has come and gone, and the majestic roll of circling centuries begins anew. Justice returns old Saturn or Jupiter's reign, with a new breed of men sent down from heaven. Only do thou at the boy's birth, in whom the iron age shall cease, the golden race arise. Befriend him, chaste Lucina, 'tis thine own Apollo reigns. He shall receive the life of gods and see heroes with gods commingling, and himself be seen of them, and with his father's worth reign over the world. Assume thy greatness, for the time draws nigh, dear child of gods, great progeny of Jupiter or Zeus. See how it totters, the world's orbed might, earth and wide ocean, and the vault profound. All see, enraptured at the coming time, end quote. Now, according to Virgil and the Cumae Sibyl, whose prophecy formed the Novus Ordo Seclorum of the Great Seal of the United States. The New World Order is going to begin during a time of chaos, when the earth and oceans are tottering, a time like today. This is when the Son of Promise arrives on earth, Apollo incarnate, a pagan savior, born of a new breed of men sent down from heaven when heroes and gods are blended together. It sounds eerily similar to what the Watchers did, doesn't it, during the creation of the Genesis 6 giants, and why many believe Antichrist also represents a return of the Nephilim. But to understand why such a fanciful prophecy about Apollo, son of Jupiter, returning to Earth should be important to you, in ancient literature, Jupiter was the Roman replacement of Yahweh as the greatest of the gods. He was a counter Yahweh. His son Apollo is a replacement of Jesus, a counter Messiah, a counter Jesus. This Apollo comes to rule when the final New World Order arrives as justice returns old Saturn's reign. The ancient goddess Justice, who returns Saturn's reign, Saturnia Regna, the pagan golden age, was known to the Egyptians as Mat and to the Greeks as Demas, while to the Romans she was Lustitia. Statues and reliefs of her abandon thousands of government buildings and courts around the world, but especially in Washington, D.C., as famous Lady Justice, as we call her, blindfolded and holding scales and a sword. She represents the enforcement of secular law and is, according to the Sibyl's conjure, the authority that's going to require global compliance to the zenith of Satan's dominion, concurrent with the coming of Apollo. What's more, the Bible's accuracy concerning this subject is alarming, including the idea that pagan justice is going to require surrender to a satanic system in a final world order under the rule of Jupiter's son. In the New Testament, the identity of the god Apollo, repeat coded in the Great Seal of the United States as the Masonic Messiah who returns to rule the earth, is the same spirit, verified by the same name, that's going to inhabit the political leader of the end times New World Order. According to key Bible prophecies, the Antichrist will be the progeny or the incarnation of the ancient spirit of Apollo. 2 Thessalonians 2:3 says this, "Let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come, except there come a falling away first, and the man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition." And the Greek word there, perdition, is Apollo, Apoleia. Revelation 17:8 likewise ties the coming of Antichrist with Apollo, revealing that the beast is going to ascend from the bottomless pit and enter into him. Here's what it says, quote, "The beast that thou sawest was and is not, and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit and go into perdition," Apoleia, Apollo. "And they that dwell on the earth shall wonder, whose names were not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they behold the beast that was and is not and yet is." Among other things, friends, that means that the Great Seal of the United States is a prophecy hidden in plain sight by the founding fathers for more than 200 years, foretelling the return of a terrifying demonic God who seizes control of earth in the new order of the ages. This supernatural entity was known and feared in ancient times by different names, Apollo, Osiris, even further back, by the way, as Nimrod, whom the Masons consider to be the father of their institution. Here's the big question. Have modern leaders of the United States government acknowledged this secret destiny of America? Well, when U.S. Representative Nancy Pelosi on January 4, 2007 first assumed her role as Speaker of the House at the opening of the 110th Congress, something interesting happened. She followed the pattern set by George W. Bush and his old man infusing a loaded statement concerning the founding fathers, saying they were so confident, quote, in the America they were advancing, they put on the seal, the Great Seal of the United States, Novus Ordo Seclorum, a new order for the centuries, end quote. Pelosi did not go into detail as to why she considered the phrase Novus Ordo Seclorum important dialectic during the momentous changeover of the control of Congress, and neither did she add why that expression exists beneath the unfinished pyramid and the all-seeing eye of Horus, Osiris, Apollo in the Great Seal of the United States in the first place. But her allusion to it was not coincidental. I believe it was framed against January 20, 2001, when her dynastic establishment pal, President George W. Bush, during his first inaugural address, faced the obelisk known as the Washington Monument, and he twice referred to an angel that rides in the whirlwind and directs this storm. Now, Bush's reference was credited to Virginia statesman John Page, who had written to Thomas Jefferson after the Declaration of Independence was signed and had said, quote, "We know the race is not to the swift nor the battle to the strong. Do you not think an angel rides in the whirlwind and directs this storm?" End quote. But just 5 weeks after Bush's inaugural, on Wednesday, February 28, 2001, Congressman Major R. Owens of New York stood before the House of Representatives, and he actually prayed to this angel in the whirlwind, asking the spiritual force to guide the future and the fate of the United States. 28 weeks later, for a total of 33 weeks from the day of the inaugural, a number invaluable to mysticism and occult fraternities, 19 Islamic terrorists attacked the United States, according to the official story, hijacking 4 commercial airliners and crashing 2 of them into the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in New York City. They slammed a 3rd into the Pentagon, and a 4th, which had been directed towards Washington, D.C., crashed near Shanksville, Pennsylvania. But what happened that day resulted in nearly 3,000 immediate deaths, at least 24 missing persons, and the stage being set for changes to the existing world order. Following that, when Bush was giving his second inaugural speech 4 years later, he continued offering cryptic commentary, saying, quote, "For half a century, America defended our own freedom by standing watch on distant borders. After the shipwreck of communism came years of relative quiet, years of repose, years of sabbatical. And then there came a day of fire," end quote. A few paragraphs following, Bush continues to clarify where he's coming from by adding, quote, "By our efforts, we have lit a fire as well. A fire in the minds of men. It warms those who feel its power. It burns those who fight its progress. And one day, this untamed fire will reach the darkest corners of the world," end quote. Now, if you don't know this, that phrase, "a fire in the minds of men," is from Fyodor Dostoevsky's 19th century book, The Possessed, or The Devils. This was a novel that was set in pre-revolutionary Russia, where civil resistance is seen championed by nihilist Sergei Negov, who tries to ignite a revolution of such destructive power that society will be completely destroyed. Folks, the fact that a United States president would quote that phrase in an official speech of record was astonishing to many of us at the time, given that The Possessed, The Devils, is about violent government crackdown on dissent that sparks civil unrest and revolution marked by public violence, something eerily reminiscent of today. Fire in the Minds of Men is also the title that historian James H. Billington so famously chose for his book on the history of revolutions, including the origin of occult Freemasonry, and its influence in the American Revolution. To make matters even more transparent to his secret society pals, in his closing comments, Bush himself tied the inaugural crypticisms to the Masonic involvement in the American Revolution, saying, quote, "When our founders declared a new order of the ages, they were acting on an ancient hope that is meant to be fulfilled," end quote. The phrase, "a new order of the ages," is taken, of course, from the Great Seal, Novus Ordo Seclorum. And Bush further acknowledged that the secret society members were acting on an ancient hope that is meant to be fulfilled. Now fast forward to today and the election of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and the surreal, illicit invocation to dark supernaturalism tied to those governing entities, intent on fulfilling, as Bush prophesied, that ancient conspiracy from the Great Seal of the United States. Well, that plot's been immediately revived. Right on cue, we watched as Democrat Representative Emanuel Cleaver offered up the congressional prayer opening up the 117th Congress in the name of, quote, "the monotheistic God Brahma, and God known by many names by many different faiths," end quote. Setting aside the numerous incorrect assumptions by Cleaver involving Brahma, the entreaty to such a Hindu god was actually highly appropriate. Why? Because Vice President Kamala Devi Harris, her name invokes deities from Hindu mythology, and not just any kind of generic deity, but illusionary and destructive ones. From the surprising meaning of Kamala Harris's name at thelist.com, you can read how, quote, "Kamala is another name of a well-known Hindu goddess who is probably better known as Lakshmi. Devi is a Hindu goddess as well. It is a Sanskrit word that means goddess, but it's also the name of the Hindu mother goddess. Devi is considered to encompass womanhood completely, but she does have a fierce side and is involved not only in creating worlds, but destroying them as well." Now, Kamala's sister's name matches hers. Maya's middle name is Lakshmi as well. Maya is also a Sanskrit name meaning illusion, and is another name of Durga, a Hindu goddess. Now, the list goes on to explain that Kamala's mother, Shamala, chose those names specifically because, quote, "a culture that worships goddesses produces strong women," end quote, she told the Los Angeles Times. Perhaps that explains why those strong women and men have taken to the streets of Portland, Oregon over the last 2 years to feed the spirit of chaos beneath the shadow of Portlandia. The second largest copper statue after the Statue of Liberty of a goddess in the United States at 34 feet, 10 inches tall, and weighing 6.5 tons. If standing, she would tower at approximately 50 feet tall. The Portlandia statue is located above the entrance of the City of Portland office buildings. It's downtown, where much of the chaos has been playing out. It's implicative of the goddess of witchcraft, Hecate, supposedly designed after Lady Commerce on the Portland City Seal. Portlandia holds a trident, which is considered of the utmost importance for sorcery and indispensable to the efficacy of infernal rites. She holds that under a 6-pointed star, also an important instrument of dark arts and Hecatean witchcraft. Now, as occultists know, the metal, copper, that Portlandia is crafted from was sacred to these ancient goddess worshippers. In early Rome, copper was called cyprium, due to it being primarily mined from Cyprus, the birthplace of the goddess Aphrodite. It was also sacred to the sun god of Babylon and similar deities, some of whom required human sacrifice. A plaque beneath Portlandia offers disquieting connections between her influence over that city and the souls of those citizens that she reigns over. Here's what it says, quote, "She kneels down and from the quietness of copper reaches out. We take that stillness into ourselves, and somewhere deep in the earth, our breath or souls become her city. If she could speak, this is what she would say. Follow that breath. Home is the journey we make. This is how the world knows where we are, end quote. Ladies and gentlemen, the pattern continues between some of America's recent national leaders, whose invitations, unlike Donald Trump's habitual recognition of the Judeo-Christian God of the Bible, have been to dark supernaturalism for ruling over and guiding the souls and destiny of the nation into an occult world order. This now includes the new vice president, who could certainly become the actual president if aging Joe Biden, who former White House stenographer Mike McCormick, who worked for Biden for the past 6 years, says has lost 50% or more of his cognitive abilities if he becomes incapacitated or otherwise incapable of fulfilling his 4-year term. And she, of course, again bears the name of Hindu entities connected with illusion and the destruction of worlds. But that said, Joe Biden's name is also intriguing. In fact, a Jewish scholar has pointed out that the Hebraic name for Joe Biden translates as alas, judgment. And then there are other experts that note that his name beckons the arrival of a promised son, a Messiah, according to prominent Rabbi R.I. Weingarten, who says that Biden's name contains the letters which spell out the word for hand. Now, an article at Israel365.com explains the significance. Quote, Rabbi Weingarten states the first and last letters of Biden's name spell out the word ben, meaning son, which hints at the process of Messiah, which will come through Messiah ben David, the anointed son of David, and Messiah ben Joseph, the anointed son of Joseph. Rabbi Weingarten added that the gematria, Hebrew numerology, of Ben is 52, which equals the name of Elijah, the prophet, who is the harbinger of the Messiah. Rabbi Weingarten then noted the inner letters of the name Biden, Yud and Dalet. The gematria of those letters equals 24. Many times in the Bible, he says, David's name is written with Yud, bringing the numerical total of his name to 24. He then goes on to explain Biden's last name is coming to remind us that we are on the verge of Elijah's arrival to reestablish the Davidic dynasty. The problem is, of course, for Christians and Messianic Jews, the Messiah already arrived in the New Testament. His name is Jesus. Therefore, the prophetic suggestion involving Biden's name more likely indicates a role that he might play with the coming of the false Messiah, the Antichrist. And there are some Orthodox rabbis who seem to agree with that conclusion, connecting the election of Biden and Kamala with the return of the days of Noah. Rabbi Yoel Schwartz, the head of the Sanhedrin's Noahide court, a highly respected Torah law authority, actually produced a video in which he commented on the divergent possibilities of the U.S. presidential election. And one of the things that he made that I found interesting was where he found that the elections were held on the 17th of Shesvan. Schwartz noted that according to Jewish tradition, rains that caused the flood in the time of Noah began falling on that day. It was also on that day, he says, that here in Israel, the first rains of the season fell in earnest. They should have been rains of blessing, but since Biden was elected, these rains became like the rain of the same day in the time of Noah, a harbinger of a coming flood. He also says, quote, the Democrats are spreading the very same sins that forced Noah into the ark. While another rabbi similarly noted in Hebrew that Harris's name also means destruction. So, with Trump out of the way, at least for the time being, the dark side of the deep state is quickly reviving efforts to get America back on track to its secret destiny, summoning those agents of chaos whose ancient scheme is going to culminate in arrival of the dreaded man of sin. Joe Biden himself pledged allegiance to that New World Order in the Wall Street Journal op-ed, How I Learned to Love the New World Order, in which he detailed his vision of surrendering American sovereignty to a new global government via the United Nations. You can Google that and read it for yourself. Will Biden's vision quickly unfold in the countdown to Zeitgeist 2025? It appears that left-leaning Americans are certainly rushing to embrace that vision, and it brings me to the countdown to 2025, the prophecy on the Great Seal of the United States, and the secret destiny of America. Let me tell you a little story. Over a decade ago, on a business trip to Washington, D.C., my wife Nita and I, with help from a congressman at that time, were able to meet with two members of the Scottish Rite Freemasonry who had unrestricted access to all but the most secret and highest guarded documents of the order. We joined one of them at the House of the Temple, the headquarters of the Scottish Rite Freemasonry, Southern Jurisdiction, where the Rites Supreme Council, 33rd degree, have their meetings. And we met with the other one at the George Washington Masonic Memorial in Alexandria, Virginia. Both of these men were very helpful and informative, but they became evasive whenever I probed too deeply into certain areas. At the House of the Temple, like elsewhere, the Brotherhood of Darkness, as my old late friend Dr. Stanley Monteith used to call them, intentionally hide in plain sight their occult aspirations, which ultimately are going to be conceived in that one world order and one world religion under the son of Lucifer. Or, as Manly P. Hall put it, quote, the outcome of the secret destiny is a world order ruled by a king with supernatural powers. This king was descended of a divine race. That is, he belonged to the order of the illumined. For those who come to a state of wisdom, then belong to a family of heroes, perfected human beings, end quote. And when Hall offered that astonishingly perceptive commentary about the future Masonic king who is descended of a divine race of illumined or Luciferic heroes, perfected, half-man, half-god human beings, he nailed exactly what the Watchers had done and what the Cumae Sibyl's Great Seal prophecy says is going to occur again with the second coming of Apollo, Osiris, Nimrod. Now, I cited the Cumae Sibyl's prophecy earlier, which Manly P. Hall noted is reflected in the, quote, mass of occult and Masonic symbols, end quote, on the Great Seal, which he believed only students of archaic or esoteric symbolism would be able to accurately decipher. But after years of research and meeting with high-level Freemasons and others, I believe that I too can help with this enigma. And it requires that I back up a little bit and explain some history that you may have seen me discussing recently on Daystar Television, as well as you will see in an even more intense upcoming 6-week special series set to air on Skywatch TV throughout July and the beginning of August. That starts at the signing of the Declaration of Independence. And the authors of that historic document, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, and Benjamin Franklin. Within one day of July 4, 1776, these three men were assigned the task of serving what today we would call a steering committee or a task force regarding the Great Seal's design. What should it ultimately communicate about the establishment of this nation, its objectives, its destiny? That's what Great Seals are supposed to do. First, consider that John Adams was an American president and a close friend of Thomas Jefferson. But Adams rejected the Christianity of his parents. In fact, he hated the doctrine of the Trinity. He hated the notion of the deity of Jesus and other foundational truths of Christianity that were being preached at that early time. But worse than Adams was the second member of the Great Seal Triad, Thomas Jefferson, along with Thomas Paine, who also wrote that Jesus was a blasphemous fable and that the Bible was scarcely anything but a history of the grossest vices and a collection of the most paltry and contemptible tales whose Almighty, he said, committed debauchery with a woman engaged to be married. And the belief of this debauchery is called faith, he said. Yeah, early founding fathers did give themselves to such astonishing blasphemy. Jefferson was among the worst. In fact, he said this about the book of Revelation in a letter to General Alexander Smith, dated January 17, 1825, quote, "It is between 50 and 60 years since I read it, and I then considered it merely the ravings of a maniac, no more worthy nor capable of explanation than the incoherences of our own nightly dreams," end quote. Through the rest of his letter, Jefferson made it clear to the general that he had not repented of his formerly held view, and he believed that the chronicle of Jesus, as depicted in the Bible, was an unmitigated fraud. Here is what he said in another letter to William Short, dated October 31, 1819, quote, "The greatest of all the reformers of the depraved religion of his own country was Jesus of Nazareth, abstracting what is really his from the rubbish in which it is buried," talking about the Bible, "easily distinguished by its luster from the dross of his biographers, and as separable from that as the diamond from the dunghill," end quote. That passage describes the approach that Jefferson also took in writing his so-called Jefferson Bible. What he claimed he was attempting to do, and he wrote about extensively, in hacking the Bible into pieces and then taping it back together to form his own cursed version of Scripture, was to separate the true sayings of Jesus from the things he believed had been added to the gospel accounts. For example, in a letter to John Adams, he wrote, quote, "In the New Testament, there is internal evidence that parts of it have proceeded from an extraordinary man, and that other parts are of the fabric of very inferior minds. It is as easy to separate those parts as to pick out diamonds from dunghills," end quote.